This evening, I have the honor and privilege of introducing Gerry Braun, one of the top speakers that's come to our attention over the last 7 or 8 years. Gerry has accumulated 50 years plus worth of energy technology and business experience within both the utility and the solar industries, as well as working in federal, state, local government areas, and also as an advocate for clean energy. He founded over a decade ago Integrated Renewable Energy Systems, which is a most world-class organization. I've scoped it out over the last several months. Tonight, he's going to speak to the emerging role of California's community choice energy industry, their role in decarbonizing California and pushing us towards fossil-free green energy fuel, and making it much more resilient so that we're not subject to rolling blackouts in the summer, and much more equitable so everybody has a chance to benefit both financially and quality of life wise. So now introducing Gerry. Thank you very much in advance for taking the time to speak to us. We appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you, Phil. Can everybody hear me? I'm assuming so. So I'll get started. It's an honor to be among the speakers that you've had, and I really have a lot of respect for the ones that I know personally, what they've done and what they are doing. And I really appreciate and respect the work that this organization is doing. So I'm looking forward to a good discussion, and I'll run through some slides. I think the topic is important because community choice energy has already done so much that probably couldn't have been forecast. And the big question is, what more can it do based on the strength that it's gained so far, and especially what can the local governments that govern community choice agencies, what can they start doing with the help of the community choice industry? Now I've got to be able to move the slides, and that isn't working on my computer. Any ideas?
Make sure that you're in your presentation app or program and not so much
well, let's see, screen sharing.
What you're sharing us with.
Okay, we'll try it again, I guess. Let's try this. And it's still.
Just go to slideshow, Gerry, and
There you are.
next. There you go. Go to
okay.
slideshow and just hit the down arrow. Should be fine.
Okay. I'll do that. I was pushing the side arrow. Maybe that was the problem. No, there we go. Sorry. So start with nomenclature. Community choice is referred to as community choice or community choice aggregation or CCA or community choice energy or CCE. all of them refer to the same thing. I prefer community choice energy because it emphasizes our energy future as opposed to the process of aggregating customers. So I want to basically kind of, this is an outline in a way of what I'm going to say. The phases that have already occurred in the community choice movement have brought us to where we are, and they're basically three phases. First, community choice didn't start in California. It actually started in Ohio, Massachusetts, and Illinois. And the emphasis was basically aggregating electricity customers and offering lower cost electricity than they could get from their existing suppliers. And of course, that wasn't a stable situation in all cases. In California, the emphasis has been on bulk electricity procurement, especially focused on renewable and low carbon electricity. And now that we have, basically stable community choice providers, the transition has been to develop generation portfolios that are based on competitive procurements and with emphasis on, where possible, on local projects. That's where we are now. And I think the question is there a phase 4 that that leads to a greater emphasis on local supply, local integration, procuring procuring electricity from a mix of resources, not just centralized resources as currently, but with increased involvement with local resources and local goals and priorities. And I would like to get rid of there we go. So where we are now, and just as a kind of a way, a metric, CCA, CCE in California is providing generation services to over 200 cities and counties that have a combined population of 11 million people. So that's a big chunk of California. And the focus has been on low carbon sources of electricity and keeping rates below or at or below what investor-owned utilities charge. We're not alone. It didn't start in California, but we are basically in a position of having created a new model for community choice that's being looked at in other states. The blue states are exploring, creating the same kind of legislation that California did. Especially Colorado basically Colorado's PUC has recommended a way to proceed with community choice in Colorado that very much closely mirrors California, but also corrects some of the problems we have in California. And most recently, Vermont launched community choice, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because I think it's a new model for community choice that really is very attractive and perhaps should be looked at for the next phase in California. The legislation that launched community choice in California was kind of opportunistically created in the wake of California's electricity crisis. California had authorized what is called customer choice, where basically electricity wholesalers could provide generation services to larger customers via something called direct access that is still available, but it hasn't been expanded. So community choice aggregation was essentially authorized because customer choice was being curtailed. Um, the AB 117, I want to read the literal language because it's important. Empowered cities and counties served by investor-owned utilities to facilitate the sale and purchase of electrical energy, transmission, and other services on behalf of electricity customers in their jurisdictions. One of the key aspects of the legislation was customers could opt out. They didn't have to be enrolled with the community choice provider, the local provider, and if they did enroll, were enrolled, they could later on decide they didn't to be disenrolled. So, and in that case, the investor-owned utility would continue both as the electricity supplier and distributor. The opt-out provision has resulted in about community choice providers providing to about 90% of the eligible participants in their area. So about 10% on the average remain customers of the investor-owned utility. So I want to talk a little bit about what it looks like from a governance perspective, what community choice looks like from that perspective. Because of the risks involved in creating a new agency, most of the jurisdictions that are part of community choice agencies are part of what are called joint powers authorities. And this framework insulates the member jurisdictions, the cities and counties, from financial responsibility, and also from having to engage actively in local energy policy and planning. So it's a double-edged sword. It insulates from responsibility, but it also insulates from being more active in charting a city or county's own energy future. So governance, as you might expect, given some of the things, well, as you might not expect, but I'll tell you why. Governance of the JPI, community choice JPAs, focuses on rates, reserves, income risk, and opt-out risk, because the CCAs are subject to opt-outs. They need to meet or beat the investor-owned utilities rates, and and in a way they have an extra burden to deal with because of something called exit fees. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And the fact that they are able to survive and thrive under the circumstances is really a tribute to good management and careful planning. Their power procurement focus is basically on meeting and exceeding state renewable portfolio standards, and on doing that at a lower cost than the investor-owned utilities have. And basically their outreach, they focus a lot on outreach, and the outreach focus is basically on retaining customers, meeting their expectations, communicating with them so that they understand what the CCE is doing for them. And of course, because of the CCEs have relatively small staffs, they outsource quite a bit of the work that can be done by contractors. So they're lean and not mean, but lean organizations. I think this figure tells a huge story. In the first CCEs in California were formed in Marin and Sonoma County in 2007 and 2011. And then by 2016, they were supplying a lot of gigawatt hours, but the big wave of new CCEs started in 2016 and is pretty much tapering off now. But again, this somewhere upwards of 20, 24, 25 agencies are in operation now. And in Northern California, it's been a little bit quicker and more active. The formations have been public distrust and high electricity prices in Northern California have been a motivating factor for formation. I want to just use the CCE that I personally got involved in starting up as kind of an example of how power procurement is done by CCEs. And I think the most important thing to point out is that it's a mix of, as you can see on the California map, we're up here in Yolo County, and we have several projects in our own area, but more projects in Southern California where the solar resources are better. And one of the things that's happened in the last couple of years is ramping up on battery storage projects, both coupled with solar and by themselves, because the state requires that not only that the CCEs supply bulk electricity, but they are accountable to provide capacity, generation capacity as well. And the term for it is kind of wonky, but it's resource adequacy. But basically, it's the capacity to generate energy, not the energy per se. And the battery storage is typically short-term now, but longer-term storage is going to be required in the future as the renewable percentages increase. And I just wanted to mention that we consider local to mean not just projects in our own county, but projects in adjacent counties. So CCEs are now collectively the primary agent of in-state renewable electricity procurement. They are capturing greenhouse gas reductions and cost savings for their customers, but they do rely on electricity transport by California's for-profit grid owners. And I think the really important news, maybe it hasn't been publicized enough, but the renewable content of CCE electricity has increased very fast in recent years, much faster than is mandated by the state. And some CCEs are aiming for 100% renewable supply or 100% renewable plus carbon-free supply well before 2030, in comparison to the state goal of I think it's 60% by 2030. So CCEs are outpacing everybody else, and it's in response to what their customers want. Meanwhile, that's the good news. The bad news is the California CPUC is moving to more closely and directly regulate CCEs. They have no legislative authority to do that, but they're doing it anyway. So that's something we need to talk about a little bit further. I wanted to also provide a context for electricity supply in California. It's probably, this may not be a chart that you would expect. If you look at 2023, which is where we are, you'll see that there are 5 major sources of electricity that we as customers rely on. One is what's called self-generation or rooftop solar in general, in particular. Another is municipal utilities, publicly owned utilities, and another is community choice. And if you add those up, more than half of California's electricity is supplied by either energy users or locally controlled entities. And then direct access, which I mentioned earlier, still, is about where it was in 2015. And investor-owned utility percentages have dropped and are really not as much of a factor as the combined effect of locally controlled supply. So I want to switch now to, that's kind of an overview of, what community choice is and what it's doing. I want to switch to, kind of one of the complicating factors, and that is, I mentioned the term exit fees, and I want to talk a little bit more about that because it's had a profound effect on the startup and it's a profound limiting effect on what CCEs can do. The authorizing legislation addressed the potential for a cost shift from customers that were departing investor-owned utility service to the remaining customers and remaining IOU customers. And so departing customers, those who were taking on, CCEs were taking on them as customers, these departing customers via their CCE were to pay above market costs of the supply contracts that the IOUs had entered into, primarily above market costs because renewable electricity was more expensive at that time. Now the California PUC mandated then, in response to the legislation, something called a power charge indifference adjustment. And this is like, what the heck is that? Basically, it's referred to as an exit fee. That is a fee that, that means that it's what the customers have to pay for the privilege of exiting investor-owned utility service. And then in more recently, the PUC expanded the departing customer obligations to equal the difference between the value of the IOU generation portfolios and their costs. And it's a big number. I want to, I have a chart here that kind of indicates how big. The market price of electricity is shown in the, the line, the kind of brownish kind line here in dollars per megawatt hour. The fees, the exit fees have increased over time, to a level that is equal to the market price of electricity. And these, so basically CCE customers are paying both the market price of electricity plus the fee for the privilege of being served by a CCE. So I guess the bright side of this picture is that the PCIA charges have motivated a big emphasis on effective procurement, cost efficiency. They've also had the effect of minimizing permanent CCE staff, but also promoting in a positive way joint sourcing with other CCAs, outsourcing of program offerings, and just generally being very, very careful with costs. So, but the biggest effect of the exit fees, PCIA charges, has been that the appetite and the motivation to engage locally, which CCEs naturally have, hasn't been fulfilled. Local projects are smaller, they're more expensive, the electricity from them is more expensive, and they're simply unaffordable if you have no margin to do anything other than source the cheapest possible electricity. So in light of all this, what is the what should be the future vision for CCE? Locally the original vision has been fulfilled, locally controlled electricity procurement. But and that, the focus on bulk electricity procurement will need to continue, but it may be too narrow. There are new as you all know, there are new technologies coming on stream, electric vehicles, rooftop solar, and so forth, that create opportunities for local cost savings, for environmental benefits, local benefits, resilience benefits, and so forth. How can CCEs help enable local governments to take action regarding, to exploit these technologies that are all locally based? And can we really create robust local energy ecosystems? And can the CCEs take on the mission of helping local jurisdictions, their member jurisdictions, engage more proactively in local resource development? Is this realistic? And if it is, how can it happen? So I think the term I like to use is kind of goes to IRESN's name, Integrated Renewable Energy Systems. How can energy supply, local energy supply, be integrated more effectively? And how can we imagine that happening and still account for the economic penalties and benefits, the trends, the needs, and the creation of collaborative relationships locally? On the topic of trends, I've kind of come up with something that the 6 Ds of a climate impacted energy future: decentralization, democratization, decarbonization, demonopolization, digitization, and disaster continuity. It's just kind of fun because it helps me remember what they are. And so I'll leave you with the chart and not go into a lot of detail, but I think what I would like to say is that these trends are real. They are happening. and they have to be managed. And local governments need to manage them. They can't outsource the management of these trends to community choice providers, although the community choice providers can really are developing capacities that will be very helpful to local governments. But local governments are going to need to step up and engage. Those were kind of qualitative trends, but I want to mention some quantitative trends as well. Renewable energy isn't what it used to be. It used to be hydroelectric power primarily, and the dominant renewable electricity sources are now wind and solar, not hydro, at least in California. The dominant energy storage medium, it used to be fuel, it's now batteries. And transportation energy supply, there's a shift there from fuel to electricity, as you all know. So those are quantitative trends, but also the investment in resilience, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that, that is actually outpacing and exceeding the cumulative investment in bulk electricity supply and transport. It's kind of under everybody's radar. And finally, energy equity and resilience is quantitatively degrading, and that degradation can be ameliorated through local investment, but better local investment than state regulation. Electricity cost trade-offs, something that gets a lot of discussion and is poorly understood and hard to explain. But the cost build-off for electricity is basically three things. It's supply, transmission, that is, the big transmission, the high voltage wires that you see, and distribution. And the chart shows something that is important, I think, locally, that is really not being addressed in terms of California energy policy, and that is that yes, large solar and wind power plants are produce cheaper electricity than smaller, more local ones, community solar and rooftop solar. But if you include the transmission costs, the local energy is actually cheaper. It's a better value. And unfortunately, state regulation doesn't recognize this. It's still designed around, monopoly service by for-profit entities. And somehow we need to move beyond that regulatory concept and towards something that does a better job of minimizing costs. So I want to, I think I want to go more quickly through the rest of the slides because I do want to get to the discussion. I said that energy resilience investment is double what is actually about. We have about 80 gigawatts of generation capacity in California. If you add up all of the local capacity, including combined heat and power, standby power, solar PV, electric vehicles, and now microgrids, by 2025, it's going to be twice that. It's going to be 2 times 80 gigawatts. These are resources and assets that need to be better managed locally. Likewise, we have, if you look at the graph or the chart, the bar chart, you'll see that additional rooftop solar in 2022 is equal to the total amount of solar that was in place in 2014. So rooftop solar is growing very rapidly, and it has benefits to local economies and budgets that are I say too often overlooked, but really need more attention paid to them. I mentioned New Hampshire. The good news about CCE being launched in New Hampshire is that, and basically California is the only state that I know of that has exit fees and PCIAs and that sort of thing, but New Hampshire doesn't. And so the plans for CCE in New Hampshire include doing things locally, and doing things in taking a role in energy equity and remediation, environmental remediation, and so forth. All these things we can't do in California because of the PCIA. So, the vision for the 21st century, and especially for CCE, really needs to recognize this double arrow here on the chart. Electricity is going to flow back and forth from the community to the big grid, and we need a model that makes that work, that will rely considerably on the investor-owned grid owners, but CCEs really need to take a role, which means thinking out of the CPUC IOU box, and recognizing that local governments already do the kind of things in the other services they provide, as they need to start doing in the electricity sector. A local water utility, and by the way, I serve on our city's utilities commission, or I wouldn't have recognized this. Our local water utility and a 21st century local energy utility would accomplish exactly the same functions governed by either a city or a county. So there's no reason why local governments can't play a stronger role, and now CCEs are in a position to support them in doing that. So, and I would say there's a major point favoring decentralization of electricity planning and operations, and that is the principle of subsidiarity. It basically says matters ought to be handled by the smallest and lowest or least centralized competent authority, and that is exactly the opposite of where California is and seems to be headed. I think California has an interest in really making, I'll put it this way, making the IOUs the servant of the people via the CPUC, rather than the CPUC the servant of the IOUs. So I don't want to harp on that, but we can talk about it. So I'm going to just very quickly summarize. I've got two or three more charts, and then we can talk. The CCE community very quickly overcame some significant obstacles, and one of them was that they had no track record financially, had no credit. The PUC's policy of power charge indifference is unique, it's pernicious, and it's inconsistent with legislative intent. Something should be done. there are unstoppable trends in local energy investment and cost that favor much more active engagement by cities and counties. CCE is meeting the need for speed and scale in response to climate concerns. It's meeting the need for prudent investment in statewide decarbonization in ways that California's investor-owned utilities cannot and will not match. But new or updated legislation is going to be required. So in conclusion, I guess I'll just say the bottom line. I would like to see California legislators work with the CEC industry to update the authorizing legislation to create a public service planning environment for CCEs that respects local authorities and responsibilities. And I think if that happens, CCE will go to the next level and be able to do even more than it's contributing right now. So thank you. Look forward to questions and conversation.
Oh, thank you, Gerry. Absolutely fascinating. I think I have a few questions, and I'm sure the audience does and Phil does. So just to start, the notion of rooftop solar and resilience embodied in microgrids seems to me to make a great deal of sense in the CCE world. And one of the recent things I've learned about is East Bay Community Energy in the Bay Area, Fremont, Hayward, and north to Walnut Creek and so forth. Took 4 of the cities, the CCE, took 4 cities, found 4 or 5 microgrid locations, probably city government locations in each city, aggregated them together into 15 or 16 microgrids, and then found an organization to provide a $1.5 million grant and put out these 16 microgrids with centralized management, that is adding people or dealing with faults and so forth is handled from a centralized console for these 4 cities for all of the dozen plus microgrids. Having done that, they found that so successful and so satisfying, they went to the remaining cities in their district, aggregated a bunch more of microgrids, and they're just in the process of submitting a $1.5 billion grant request based upon the IRA for, again, this huge package of microgrids throughout their area and with central control. And there are several questions for me in this. It seems to me that addressing the issues of resilience, local control, bypassing the IOUs, getting consolidated funding. I don't know what kind of balance sheet. One of my questions here is what kind of balance sheet does the CCE have to go after projects like this? And do you agree that, or does it make sense to you that to not go do one microgrid at a time, but to collect a whole bunch of them and aggregate them into a centralized managed or centrally managed set of resources for the CCE territory? What do you think of this idea?
Oh, well, I think it's really an important project to, to highlight. I think it does point to the difference between CCEs and investor-owned utilities. An investor-owned utility would, and historically, I worked for 2 investor-owned utilities, so I know them pretty well, would get the PUC to authorize them to fund a pilot project. And after a few years, they would, maybe do something beyond that, maybe not. And so I think what you're seeing is the CCE in East Bay is basically, in an answer to your question, they're big enough to have a good credit rating. They have the advantage of scale. Some of the smaller ones like mine are, still working on getting to that point, but they have the credit rating. And so they are in a position to kind of, I don't know, since they're serious about what they're trying to do for the community, and that's their focus, they're able to say, well, if it works for one, if it's something that might work for one of our neighborhoods, let's let others have a chance to do that too. And so they're going, they're not doing things sequentially, they're doing things in big steps. I think that's what it takes in a climate context. And I think, the people, the people here on this call or are understand the urgency. And I think what you see is the CCEs do understand the urgency of climate change. Utility, Wall Street may not. And that's who the investor-owned utilities are accountable to. So I think you're seeing just a stark contrast between the traditional approach of state-regulated utilities, and you have to forgive them to some extent because the state regulation is not quick or easy or cheap. But being free from that regulation does allow CCEs to do a lot more. That what is the important thing to point out is that not all of the CCEs are as large as East Bay. I think there are some significant advantages of being able to focus, on specific local needs that may be different from one community to another. I think it's great that you can do things for the same thing for more communities because it's the same thing. But I think it's also important for the CCEs to be able to work with each of their member jurisdictions to what is your plan? What are your needs? How far do you want to go? What resilience issues do you have that nobody else has? I really see an advantage to not just size, but also also not just scale, but also being closer to the customers, closer to the local government.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Gerry. Janice, do you?
Hi, yes. We have some questions in the chat, and the first one from Kathy, I'm very interested in as well because I am an educator. Kathy asks, are you aware of any partnerships with school districts and CCEs? Our school district has Olaf and continues to hope that the CCE will negotiate procurement and school-only rates based on summer energy generation.
That's a great question. My experience is that the smaller CCEs have very limited bandwidth to work with a broad spectrum of customers. And for example, in our case, we're targeting agricultural customers because we have a lot of them. And so working with school districts is something that would probably fit into a particular shared goal. For example, in our area, the topic of resilience centers is our local governments are interested in that, and so our CCE is interested in helping. But I think it is more a question of what are the needs that the like the school what are the needs that the school district has that they need help with, as opposed to a CCE saying, oh, here's a program that we think you need. I think it's got to come from, in the current stage of the industry development, the CCE industry development, it has to be there has to be local governments and school districts saying, here's the help we need, can you arrange it? And I think that'll work better for right now than hoping that the CCE is going to go looking for work. They have limited capacity right now.
Phil?
Sorry, did you want me to go ahead with?
No, let's let Phil had some questions also. We'll just cycle if that's okay.
Okay, sure.
Thanks. So my foundational question is, how do you see a piece of legislation that could serve to evow CCEs, since the original legislation is obviously outdated? It's been over 20 years. We have the PCIA, which is like carrying heavy chains while trying to move the organizations forward. How do we engage the state assembly and Senate in a way that catches the attention? Like the IOUs can walk in apparently any day of the week and they capture their attention because of their lobbying power. The CCEs have us, the grassroots, we don't have any real lobbying power. So how can we actually effectively engage?
Thanks for the question, Phil. And I know we've kicked things like that around between us. I guess my image is that there will be local governments within CCE service territories that will want to meet the needs there and solve the energy issues in their communities. And they will want the CCE's help, and they will want to be able to ask the CCE to do certain things that it can't do now. And that it probably be will probably be, who knows which local government will say, I want something done and I want some legislation passed so that I can do it, and with the CCE's help I can do it, and so the legislation will be written for that purpose. And I'll say that this is more the pattern that is kind of part of the CCE tradition. Marin County basically led the way in getting CCE underway. They were launching a CCE before most of the other jurisdictions even knew the opportunity was there. I know that because one of the first thing I did when I came back to California in 2007 was go around the state helping local governments understand what CCE was and you know, that they could do it. Marin County was already ready to do it, but one of their supervisors basically championed that and was, you know, a bulldog about it. And I think it's going to take that. That's going to be where the legislation comes from. There's going to be one legislator who's, you know, working for his jurisdiction and getting them what they need. And if it takes legislation to change CCE, he'll get it. He or she will get it done.
Nothing like finding a champion, huh?
I think that's
Hey,
what's.
Joe, before, I think
You go.
there's a related question in the chat, and I think you probably already addressed it, but I just want to make sure that Claire's question is heard. A legislative fix to reform the transmission access charge in addition to PCIA reform. Your thoughts, strategies, friendly legislators?
Well, that's a great question, and I can basically tell you that there was legislation proposed several years ago. One of the organizations that I've worked with, the Clean Coalition, that was their goal, to get that legislation through, and what happened was very simply that CalISO didn't want that to happen, and they have a lot of influence in the legislature. But a lot of things like that are questions of timing. The issue wasn't as well recognized. I mean, it was clear, but it was kind of arcane. And so, getting somebody to champion it other than a not-for-profit organization was tougher. But that's really, I think timing is everything. I think if we tried it again now, with the support of a legislator who really understood what difference it makes, I think it could go forward.
Thank you.
Thanks. Marginally related question also. I've heard CCE CEOs complain about the cross the street problem and the definition of utility and the like. In Vista, where I live, the Civic Center is across the parking lot from the library, which are, of course, managed by different administrations. Would it be possible to have a single microgrid to serve both facilities? Would that even be legal? And how do we deal with this cross the street problem? And what a CCE can do without serving multiple customers, end customers, with a single facility like microgrid?
That's a tough question. Microgrids can be done where the grid doesn't exist, like in a new development. That's pretty easy. Microgrids can be done behind a meter for a big campus. That can be done. Doing it inside the existing grid, creating a microgrid out of the existing grid does require the cooperation of the owner of that grid. And I guess the good news is that, and I don't know whether it's good news or not, I guess the good news is that the grid owners are recognizing the need for microgrids. In fact, PG&E up in the areas where they're prone to outages, up in the fire prone areas and the mountainous areas, they are actually putting in, creating microgrids and putting in the generation that would power the microgrids. So I think it's got to be somehow we've got to get to the point where the rewards for the investor-owned utility to cooperate are adequate to secure the cooperation. Right now, I don't, if I were looking at it from the investor-owned utility, I would say, I don't know what my reward is for doing this, other than perhaps, more reliable power in a particular area. So I think it's got to be a collaborative thing, and we're unfortunately not in a very collaborative framework right now.
Thank you. Janice?
Yeah, Thomas asks about the best point of access at a utility to discuss power generation for a community with storage facilities that can be a demand response asset for the utility or a community that simply provides added grid capacity.
Would you mind repeating that?
Sure. What is the best point of access at a utility to discuss power generation for a community with storage facilities that can be a demand response asset for the utility or a community that simply provides added grid capacity?
So if I understand the correct question, it starts with, who do you talk to at the utility? Is that your interpretation of the question?
I think that would be a great way to respond. Yeah, that'd be of interest to everyone.
Well, I used to have this image of utilities as having lots of doors, and you could go in one, and depending on which door you went in, you would find the right thing or not. So I'm going to have to think about that. I don't know. I'll tell you who should go to the door. Maybe that would help. It should be, the mayor or the chair of the board of supervisors, or somebody who who matters politically. I mean, honestly, that's the best answer I can give.
Thank you. And Thomas, if that didn't answer your question, you can add another question to clarify for us. Thank you. Dawn asks, why not call the exit fee a PCIA a tax? And do you think CCEs provide a footprint for feasible community microgrids, which you've touched on a little bit already? Yeah.
That's kind of two questions, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I guess is it a tax?
Could it be called a tax?
It's not called a tax. Should it be called a tax? I think, in a way, I think the CCE advocates should start calling it something other than an exit fee, because it is it's questionable. Maybe that would be the way to approach it, is kind of start talking about it as what it appears to be. But what was the other part of the question? I'm sorry.
Do you think CCEs provide a footprint for feasible community microgrids?
A footprint or a facilitator. I do think they can be a facilitator. And in fact, yeah, and I'm familiar with our strategic plan for our CCE, and that is one of our goals, is to be a facilitator for local microgrids. And in fact, we are involved in a couple of projects that are, that are for that purpose.
Does it make sense to build on the microgrid concept as sort of another step that the CCEs can take in the following sense? There's clearly a movement toward the Internet of Things and distributed energy resources and so forth. Let's imagine a community with homes that all have, or many have, controllable thermostats and controllable timers that say turn on the AC, a half hour before I going to return from work or whatever. It implies that there's a whole set of functions and capabilities that could serve end customers if there's software someplace that can manage these kinds of services. Is managing DER services, using software control, a logical extension of the CCE business model, things that they could do and generate income from?
Well, I like that. I like that question, because one of the things that I felt, this is before most of the CCEs started up, and before we even considered it in our area, I felt that an enterprise that has only one source of revenue, unless you're a monopoly, that's a very fragile situation. And I felt that CCEs should develop additional revenue streams by providing additional services. And I think that is one service that would be a logical addition to the service that they provide. You obviously have to put together a business plan and make sure that your net revenues are positive. But I think that's the kind of thinking that CCEs need to start doing. Just buying and selling bulk energy, bulk electricity is not the full potential of having a locally governed entity.
Okay, Phil, do you have another question?
Thank you. Back to the thing of coming together, the community choice groups of California, the 24 organizations. Do you think that they could and should sort of consolidate on this PCIA issue and represent through the cities and counties their point of view to the California Assembly and state representative, plural, or sort of representing different groups? So would that be the leverage point?
Yeah, CalCCA is their trade association, and that's what trade associations traditionally do. So it's certainly a reasonable expectation. I would point out that CalCCA did take an initiative to fix the PCIA, and in the process of, but they didn't go to the legislature. They participated, or made a proposal to the PUC, and what happened was the result was worse than the prior condition. So they're gun shy in terms of proposing things that could be, by using the leverage that the IOUs have politically, could be, turned around and make things worse than they were before. But I think, again, working with, the trade association certainly has a great deal of political potential. I don't think it's exercising it yet. And I think in the meantime, the hope would be that individual CCEs could work with their legislators to get what wants to be done in their area. I think that, if that'll be a good way of kind of educating the legislature as to what the problems are. And I think that that's got to be a pathway that's tried. Cal CCA, they're still new, and so are all the CCEs. So I'm hopeful.
So in other words, San Diego County CCEs as a whole could come together, since we're all sort of in the same geography, and fulfill that mission.
Obviously, if the whole industry is, pushes in the same direction, it'll work better. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep. Janice?
Yeah, Claire is asking, and I'm an educator, so we have a lot of acronyms in education, but this question has a few. CPUC is undertaking community engagement as part of the high DER proceedings. Can CCEs work with local CBOs to represent communities in this process?
Great, a good question, which gets us into CPUC proceedings and what are reasonable expectations. I know that particular proceeding, and I know people who are engaged in it. And I would say that it's too late. If you haven't registered as a participant in the proceeding already, it's hard to actually have hard to engage. You really need to get in at the beginning of the proceeding with the PUC. That's not the only problem. Whether, typically the strongest influences in those proceedings, the CPUC proceedings, are the investor-owned utilities. They are, they can hire more lawyers than everybody else. So I don't hold out a lot of hope for CPUC proceedings. I think that we need to get CCE out from under the CPUC, not entangled with it. That would be, sorry to say that, but yeah.
You've mentioned several times, Gerry, things about the economic strength or lack thereof of the CCEs, and I'd like to know, what are there guidelines for the economic reserves that the CCEs have to go out and borrow money to implement some of the deployments we've been talking about of microgrids, et cetera. And related to that, there's a whole lot of money in the IRA, in infrastructure bills. There are grants. I know that the Bay Area, 3 of the Bay Area CCEs applied collectively for like $6.5 billion of grants. And as far as I know, the San Diego County ones have not. Is there a process of staying on top of this and making sure that we apply for grants, or maybe they're already doing it and I just don't know? But what are the parameters around economic strength and grant applications in this environment?
Well, I don't think you need a particular balance sheet or credit rating to apply for federal grants or state grants for that matter. you know, I think that it's almost as if the CCE needs to, I guess my advice would be, if it's in your plan, if you already are planning to do it or find a way to do it, and the money becomes available to cost share it from any source, that's the right position to be in. But if you haven't thought about it, just trying to put together a proposal that captures some of the money could be counterproductive. You end up, and I know this, this is from my experience with a program that I oversaw at the Energy Commission. The cost of the administrative costs can be, very high, and the rules that of what you can spend money on may be also very restrictive. So you really need to look before you leap. But the best case is, I was going to do this anyway, and now I can offset some of my costs. I think that's but that's just my own personal.
Yeah.
outlook.
One of the obvious things to me is nearly all the cities in San Diego County have climate action plans, and integrating the CAP city by city initiatives with the CCE where they overlap
Yeah.
just makes such obvious planning sense, I think. Anyway, Phil?
Well, I guess, what about, and this is to the microgrids, do you think there's the discussion on in front of the meter, behind the meter, what's the easiest approach for where we're at today as far as distributed renewable energy? Where can we have the most impact right now in 2023 in terms of building resiliency?
Well, I think to some extent it's opportunistic. I'll give you an example, and I'm glad you asked the question, because I think the battery storage and the need to deploy battery storage and the CCE's need to deploy battery storage could be, very synergistic with the microgrid interest. Because I'll give you an example. We have a battery storage project that is going to be located in a portion of the grid in our county, which is very vulnerable to disruption. And so we're working with the investor-owned utility, PG&E, and others, and the local governments in that area, to locate the battery storage on the local parts of the local grid that are really vulnerable, and that is an opportunity then to build microgrids from that, out from there. Mm-hmm. And I think having a plan, again, having the plan, like we want to fix these vulnerable areas, whether they're whether it's an energy equity issue or whether it's an energy resilience issue, but having a plan and having goals and having targets, so that when the opportunity comes up to put, you're going to do this anyway, put it somewhere where you've already identified a need. I think that's where we need to get, CCEs need to do a little bit more planning of that sort. But, if you don't have the money to spend, it's hard to spend a lot of time planning. It's kind of a chicken and egg kind of thing.
Couldn't that be outsourced to a local developer of, for example, in Carlsbad's case, we're working with a developer to build a 50-acre solar energy farm in Carlsbad. Wouldn't that be a possibility? It's outsourced to a private developer who's building it for the city.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
Janice?
I'm going to skip a couple questions and go to this one because it's related to vulnerable areas and the microgrids. So even worse for California ratepayers, PG&E is proposing to underground lines at an enormous cost per mile for fire mitigation, when in many areas it is more cost effective to do microgrids for fire-prone remote locations. And PG&E will get 11% plus profit for those billions in undergrounding. Is CCCA able to get active on some of these urgent reform efforts?
It's relevant, I think, but you know, I think you'd have to establish a pretty close connection between, you know, the interest of the CCE industry and, you know, and what you would like to see the outcome be. I'm not sure that the CCEs have a direct interest in, you know, the choice to underground or take other measures to improve resilience. You know, it would be getting into somebody else's business and having no particular benefit to the CCE. And I'm sorry, I haven't thought about it. So it's a great question. My answers may not. I'm feeling the same. I'm feeling this way, that I'm getting a lot of great questions and wondering if my answers are coming up to the are worthy of the questions.
Very worthy of the questions, for sure. Yes.
Indeed, indeed. Phil?
I guess something that we've worked on over the years, over the last decade, are sort of energy conferences, sort of the status of where we're at today. Do you think that would be helpful in terms of, you mentioned the trade organization, CCCA, and it doesn't sound like they're exactly nimble, and they weren't responsive after they had that loss at CPUC. They just sort of crept back to their offices, and they didn't go back and say, hey, we can revisit this to the state legislative house, the state assembly or senate, which is what a professional level person in business would say. Hey, just because I had one strike, I would go for 100 strikes. I have to succeed. But they just said, oh, that's it. So should there be an energy conference that sort of transcends the trade organizations and asks the California CCEs, let's come together as a powerful, ready to be flexible and ready to agree on these goals for the whole state and march forward together right now, rather than waiting for some obscure group that may or may not ever take action because you know, they're all paid staff and they're happy being a paid staff.
Well, I like, you know, my top of the head reaction, Phil, is that, you know, what CCE has accomplished has all to do with decarbonization.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that CCE has tremendous potential to address resilience and to address equity. And, you know, maybe it would be good to, you know, have co-sponsor a conference on energy resilience with CCCA. Or, you know, that would open up the question of microgrids. It would, you know, that's the top of my head response to the question.
Right. Thanks.
Janice?
We have about 4 more questions, I think, in the chat, if we have time for that. The next one is, can you explain how CCE is better than a municipal utility if the municipalities need to step up and take more responsibility?
I wouldn't say that it is. I think the reality is that you cannot, under current circumstances, form a new municipal utility. This is how we ended up with the CCE in our area. We tried to, our city council voted for a municipalization before they voted against it. And I'm just kidding. They actually did. So we, after we pushed to get for municipalization, some of us, we took a deep breath and came back and said, okay, let's do CCE. I think the municipal utilities have so much more potential and control. They're not, they're not regulated by the state. They, there's not even, they don't have a PCIA, they don't have all that kind of stuff. I think that's the ideal. So if they, but so I wouldn't want to change a municipal utility into a CCE at all. On the other hand, they tend to be, at least in my experience, their big claim to fame is that they have low rates. And if you claim to have low rates, you don't have a lot of money to spend on other on other things that people might want you to do,
And then the next one is regarding procurement. What's the difference between CCE's process of procurement and a for-profit like Clean Choice in the Northwest?
Okay, I don't actually, one of the things that is really working for CCE in California is that it is doing procurement the same way that investor-owned utilities have done it in the past and still do, to the extent they do it. And so the CCE industry in California has attracted, and I'll speak for our case with Valley Clean Energy, we managed to find one of the very best power procurement people I can imagine to be our power procurement person. And that's because he spent a lot of, he had a lot of experience at, I think it was Arizona Public Service, doing the same kind of work. So, we are the beneficiary of the utility industry experience in power procurement. And that's, I think, one of the reasons CCEs have been able to come up so quickly in doing their core function. So, I mean, we might as well have a little good news here, about, so that to me, that's good news. That I don't know whether that answers your question, but
well, we always appreciate good news. So thank you for that. Another school district related question. We were told in the Carlsbad School District that creating a microgrid on our school properties would cost over $100 million. Are there grants, et cetera, to create these on public lands, including schools that can be run by the CCE? And then a follow-up to that, public bonds?
Like, I don't, the last part of the question, I was thinking so much about the first part that I lost it.
May I jump in on that just a tad?
Sure.
Santa Barbara has decided to put and has put a microgrid on every school building, and they set up their schools as resilient centers.
Right.
So that if in case of emergency or mudslides or bad weather or fire or whatever, each school building is a resilient center with guaranteed power to refrigerate medicine and whatever else, and to protect the members of the community. And when they did that, they signed a multi-year power purchase agreement. Bottom line is they paid zero out of pocket for the entire microgrid. Number two, they reduced their energy bill and had extra money to do whatever they did in the school district with. And so the cost of the microgrid, if you sign a multi-year power purchase agreement of this sort, becomes a non-issue. And related, in Arkansas, there's a school district that did a similar thing, and they saved so much money from their power bill that they were able to give every teacher in the school district a raise. So you don't have to view from a school district's from a school's point of view. I don't think we have to view the microgrid world as necessarily a huge cost. It could actually be a cost saver as well as a feature and function improver.
Yeah, and I don't see why it wouldn't be, because if you are able to, the microgrid would allow you to integrate energy storage and other, make other generation as well as solar PV, and the cost of the grid, the microgrid per se is really the cost of the microgrid controller as an additional cost. So I think it could work out. I will say that the Santa Barbara case is a good case because there's been a lot of work done in preparation for the actual project. A lot of studies, a lot of analysis, a lot has been learned that has allowed those projects to actually pencil, as the shorthand goes. So I think it's a question of starting out with, the vision and the goal of, resilience plus cost savings plus, use, low carbon and so forth. And then saying, how do we do this and get the right people aboard to come up with a plan? Because it's pretty clear that it's possible. On the other hand, if you say to somebody who doesn't want to do it, how much is it going to cost? They're going to tell you, oh, it's going to cost way too much,
$100 million.
Yeah. So I think it's a question of saying, realizing it's going to be a lot of work to get it right. And then you will be able to save money. But if you don't do all the, all of the planning and analysis, you may come up with something that doesn't work.
And one other thing that's useful, when New York City did this in some areas, they integrated the microgrid and its deployment and operation into the school curriculum. And there are some people graduating from high school who are certified microgrid installers in New York. So you can do that all the way from K through 12. Depending on the school, you can integrate into, science and physics projects and so forth, weather projects, I don't know, all kinds of things you could integrate into the curriculum. So schools have an opportunity to go beyond, just being a simple user.
And I will say, I've been tracking microgrids for a long time, and some of my colleagues are actively involved in that. And it's pretty clear to me that, there are people who can help. They're consultants. They've done microgrids. They have the experience. They know the analysis that needs to be done. So, but you have to start with them. The average, the ordinary mortal who decides to do a microgrid from first principles is probably not going to get it right.
I'll jump in as an educator in Oceanside, Kathy. I'm envious of the fact that Carlsbad has moved forward so quickly with the with the solar, and we got to get your neighbor to the north on board with that too. And if it brings raises to teachers, all the better. Well deserved. Meryl has a question related to a couple points that were made earlier. To Gerry's points on battery storage's role as a way of increasing resilience and equity, and Joe's comments about the Internet of Things. Do you envision VTG, vehicle to grid, as a large-scale contributor?
The short answer is yes. I think this is the emphasized opportunity in the electricity sector. You know, I think people don't realize how far along electric vehicles really are in terms of their ability to support this. I know I just bought one that has and I bought it for the reason that it has a bidirectional capability. You can use the vehicle battery to power the grid or your house or what have you. That's about 2 years away in terms of the entire EV industry offering that. It's only available from a couple of manufacturers that have a lot of experience. But I think it's just over the horizon, and I don't think people see it coming. I think we're still talking about, you know, adding a stationary battery to our rooftop PV array, and I think EVs are going to be a huge game changer in terms of the grid and integration with on-site solar.
Thank you. I have a question. I think we've made it through all the questions in the chat, but my question is related to misinformation. And I see people posting on social media, let's say when a city is adopting their CCE, that they're not going to participate. Individuals aren't, you know, they aren't going to partake in that nonsense because they have some misinformed idea about it, what it is. How can we counter misinformation that might be out there to assure people that this is the way to go?
I think you're doing it. I think hopefully we're doing it tonight. I think, and I think you're doing it also in terms of getting, you know, the information from these, I don't know whether it's monthly or whatever, these calls and conferences out to people. I think that's the best thing you can do. I mean, what I've noticed, and I've been involved in solar for a long, long time, is that there's sort of a cluster effect that, you know, the people who've done something or attended a meeting tend to be the people who spread the word to other people, and then they come up to speed or they go do something. It's people to people, I think. I don't know, maybe wrong.
It's
So
that,
I'd like
that
to,
little pebble. Yes.
I'm sorry about that, Janice, but I'd like to second what you're saying, Gerald. It's up to all of us, and particularly those of us on the call now. We have new information, and we can go out and we can share that on Nextdoor or Facebook or wherever when we run into other people who aren't as educated. And with that, I would like to thank you so much for being our speaker tonight. And I also would like to thank our great audience. And I'm really hoping we'll see all of you next month. But before you run off, Gerry, we have a tradition here at the North County Climate Change Alliance that we like to purchase a tree in honor of our speaker. And so we have done that for you. This tree will be planted in an area in California that has been burned by the wildfires. And so again, thank you so much. And we really appreciate this, and we'll have a follow-up on your presentation next month in the newsletter. And to everybody else, good night. And thank you so much, everybody. Take care.